For nearly 70 years, Mel Brooks lived a life filled with laughter, friendship, and creative energy. Much of it shared with one man, Carl Reiner. Their bond was not built only on comedy or success, but on something much quieter and deeper. They were friends in the truest sense, the kind who did not need constant excitement to stay connected. Most evenings were simple. They would sit together, watch Jeopardy, tease each other about the answers, and talk about ordinary things like family, aging, and memories from long ago. These moments mattered more than awards or fame. When Carl Reiner passed away in 2020, Mel Brooks felt as if the rhythm of his life had been broken. The silence in those evenings became heavier than any applause he had ever received. But slowly, that silence was softened by Carl's son, Rob Reiner. Rob stepped into those quiet evenings, not to replace his father, but to keep the connection alive. The same chairs were used. The same jokes were told. And for a while, it felt as if Carl was still there, listening and laughing somewhere in the room. Mel had watched Rob grow from a child into a man, from a curious boy into one of Hollywood's most respected directors. Their relationship was more than friendship. Mel was a guide, a mentor, and in many ways, a second father. As the years passed and age slowed them all down, that bond only grew stronger. But beneath those calm evenings, something else was quietly building, something none of them wanted to fully face. Mel would later reflect that life does not always break in loud moments. Sometimes it breaks slowly, in rooms filled with love, hope, and silence. And when that silence finally shattered, it left behind questions that could no longer be ignored. As Mel Brooks would later explain, the tragedy that unfolded was not something that arrived suddenly or without warning. It did not burst into their lives like a storm from a clear sky. Instead, it crept in quietly, day after day, year after year, hiding behind love, hope, and a deep belief that family could fix anything. Mel believed that this was the hardest truth for people to accept. Everyone wanted a simple explanation, something clean and easy to understand. An accident, a moment of madness, a single terrible night. But according to Mel's reflection, it was never that simple. He spoke about guilt, not as something loud or dramatic, but as something heavy and constant, something that sits on the chest and makes breathing difficult. He admitted that many people close to the family sensed that something was wrong, long before everything fell apart. There were tense conversations, uncomfortable moments, and signs that were quietly ignored. Love, Mel said, can sometimes blind people in ways fear never could. Rob Reiner, in Mel's eyes, was not a weak man. He was strong, intelligent, and deeply principled. But he was also a father, and that role changed everything. Rob believed, with every part of his heart, that patience, understanding, and protection could save his family from falling apart. He believed that turning away, calling for outside help, or choosing distance would mean failure, not just as a parent, but as a human being. Mel remembered one particular visit that stayed with him forever. Rob arrived exhausted, moving slowly, as if carrying a weight no one else could see. He barely spoke at first, pacing the room, stopping, starting again, like a man trapped in his own thoughts. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet and filled with fear. He admitted that his home no longer felt safe, that nights were restless, and that doors were locked out of necessity, not paranoia. To Mel, This confession was devastating. Here was a man whose life had been built on communication and trust, now living in constant tension inside his own home. Mel saw shame in Rob's eyes, not because he was afraid, but because he felt he had failed to protect everyone involved. And yet, even in that fear, Rob still held on to hope. He believed that if he endured just a little longer, if he stayed strong and loving, things would somehow improve. Mel realized then that this belief, this refusal to give up, was both Rob's greatest strength and his most dangerous weakness. Mel Brooks reflected on the years that followed, on the slow unraveling that no one had wanted to face. He described how love, even when genuine and powerful, can sometimes become a burden if it prevents action. Rob and his family had tried for years to shield the person who was causing harm, believing that patience, understanding, and compassion could change what seemed unchangeable. Mel spoke of countless nights when fear and worry kept everyone awake, of quiet sacrifices made to protect family from shame or outside interference. He saw not anger or weakness, but extraordinary devotion, even in the face of danger and uncertainty. Yet, despite all of their efforts, the problems continued to grow, and small missteps accumulated into consequences no one could fully control. Mel emphasized that the tragedy was not the result of a single moment, but the weight of years filled with hope, mistakes, and choices made out of love. He wanted people to understand that this was not a story of villains or monsters, but of ordinary humans caught in extraordinary circumstances, trying to do what they believed was right. In the end, Mel Brooks's reflections were as much about himself as about the family he had watched grow. He acknowledged the limits of human understanding, the limits of love, and the moments when even the strongest intentions cannot prevent heartbreak. And in that quiet, reflective voice, he reminded everyone that life, family, and love are complicated, that the choices we make can carry consequences we never fully foresee, and that even in tragedy, there is a lesson about resilience, hope, and the fragile, beautiful bonds that hold people together. These were the memories, the confessions, and the truths that Mel Brooks carried with him, quiet, profound, and unshakable, showing that even in sadness and loss, there is value in reflection, honesty, and the human effort to love despite all obstacles. The story of Rob Reiner and his family, as told by Mel Brooks, is one filled with extraordinary talent, tragic circumstances, and the complicated reality of unconditional love. At the heart of it is a relationship between a father and his son, a relationship that seemed normal on the surface, filled with everyday gestures of care, but underneath carried tension, frustration, and an undercurrent of fear that no one outside the family could fully understand. Rob, a gifted director and the son of a comedy legend, Carl Reiner, grew up in the shadow of immense talent and the high expectations that come with being part of a renowned creative family. His son, Nick, on the other hand, was a young man who seemed to be struggling with the burden of expectations, compounded by personal challenges that he could not fully manage. Mel Brooks recalls that over the years, the Reiner family had tried everything possible to help Nick, investing both emotional energy and financial resources, believing that love, patience, and guidance could correct his difficulties. The problem was that Nick's challenges were not simple, and his behavior was often contradictory. swinging between dependency, entitlement, and resentment. Mel tells how Rob had once shown him messages from Nick, letters and notes filled with anger and blame, each one carefully outlining grievances against his parents, holding them responsible for his own struggles. These messages were not casual complaints. They were written with intensity, as if the writer believed the world had wronged him and that his parents had the duty to fix everything. Yet despite these angry words, Rob never stopped caring. He continued to provide for his son, buying him cars, paying rent, supporting creative projects, and even shielding him from harsh realities in the hopes that patience and love could help him recover. It is a classic story of parental devotion, giving endlessly, hoping endlessly, even when the signs suggest that the child may not respond in the way the parent hopes. Mel Brooks refers to this as a kind of Hollywood disease, a belief that with enough resources, effort, and planning, anything can be fixed. Rob applied this principle to his family life, much like he would to a film set, trying to control circumstances and outcomes, perfecting the environment as if life were a script. He tried to direct his son's path in the same way he directed his movies, with precision, attention to detail, and a desire for flawless results. But life is not a film. No amount of preparation, guidance, or love can prevent someone from making choices that lead to tragedy. Mel recounts the subtle moments that revealed the depth of Nick's struggle. Even during holiday gatherings, moments that should have been joyful, tension hung in the air. Nick's eyes, once those of a child full of trust and curiosity, now seemed predatory, calculating, observing every action and reaction of those around him. When Rob made a self-deprecating joke to lighten the mood, everyone else laughed. Yet Nick remained silent, watching, analyzing. Mel could see that something had shifted in the family dynamic, that love alone was no longer enough to bridge the gap. He recalled pulling Rob aside during one of these gatherings, holding him firmly by the shoulders, and warning him that Nick's intentions were no longer innocent. "You have to get him out," Mel said. "He's not looking at you with love. He's looking at you with hunger." Rob, ever gentle and optimistic, brushed the warning aside, believing that his understanding of his son was sufficient to manage the situation. "You don't understand him like I do," Rob replied, straining to maintain calm, but his words carried the weight of denial and hope intertwined. Mel's memory of this moment is one of deep sorrow, as he realized the limits of parental love and human foresight. He cried for the boy who had grown up under the care of remarkable parents, someone who had been loved without condition, and yet whose understanding of love had become twisted, leading to behaviors that could not be controlled. Mel felt a profound sense of failure, not because he had acted wrongly, but because tragedy had been unavoidable despite the best intentions of those involved. As he reflected, he considered the question of whether unconditional love could ever truly save someone who has borne deep responsibility for their own wounds, wounds that had been ignored or minimized for far too long. In recounting this story, Mel emphasizes the contrast between appearance and reality. On the outside, the Reiner household seemed perfect, like the meticulously designed sets Rob loved to create. Lawns were trimmed, decorations were carefully placed, dinners were held with tradition and routine. Inside, however, the emotional foundation was eroding, a slow decay fueled by unaddressed issues, unchecked anger, and the weight of expectations. Even professionals, therapists, doctors, advisors, who were supposed to provide guidance, often failed to recognize the severity of the situation, offering platitudes rather than action, labeling dangerous behavior as illness without addressing the potential consequences. Mel Brooks refers to these individuals as accomplices in a sense, because they accepted the family's money and provided reassurance without confronting the truth. The pattern was clear. Love alone could not protect them, and external intervention was delayed, inadequate, or absent.